Our next speaker spends her life cultivating social soil in Latin America and the Caribbean, Celina de Sola. And Celina is working on how to empower youth, communities, through education programs, through health programs, and ultimately that connects to finance and the way you finance these things. And I think what we really want to hear from you, Celina, is about your journey. So this is going to be a conversation, and then you're going to share with us a few slides, yeah? But when I talk about the social soil, how do you respond to that? How does that resonate for you?
I think I actually really like that term. I might have to use it because that's what we talk about, creating conditions so people can navigate adversity, and I'll talk a little bit about what kind of adversity we're facing in the region for those who aren't as familiar with Latin America, and really creating conditions for people to thrive so our economies can grow as well.
So I want to ask, can you hear Celina? Because because they wanted to try to change the speakers to make sure. Yeah, good, okay. Yeah, so how people thrive, how people develop what they do. What is Glasswing? Glasswing International is the name of your organization?
Yes, it is. And I want to say buenas tardes a todos los dominicanos y muchas gracias por recibirnos acá. Thank you all for having me here. Thank you, Tom, and your whole team. I'll just say quickly, I don't know if any of you know, but glasswing is a kind of butterfly, and I love animals and nature, and it exists from Mexico to Colombia, and it has transparent wings, so it looks very fragile. So we like the idea of transformation, what it represents, and the fact that even though it looks fragile, sometimes people think that if you start something in lower middle income countries, it's going to be more fragile, and despite people's assumptions. As you all know, this butterfly in particular can hold up to 30 times its weight. So we picked an animal that is really tougher than it looks, and also just this concept of transformation and the butterfly effect, that small actions can create huge change.
Wonderful. What is it in your biography coming from El Salvador that took you on the path to doing what you do now? What was the spark for you, or the sparks?
I mean, I think I continue to get sparks, but I think like many of you in the room, you just want to leave some sort of wake, right? Like, what can you do within your sphere of influence to create conditions for other people? I think we're born arbitrarily into circumstances, and why should that determine your trajectory? Like, because you were born with access to resources or without, why should that be so determinant? So I think even when I was little, I was like, why am I in this situation and someone else isn't? And how do we create opportunities more broadly for people to be able to access that? So I think for me, it's just like there's so much human potential, just not enough opportunities. And I like this sector, right? And I get to work with a lot of sectors, with private sector and public sector too, so.
So why don't we ask you to tell us what you do, and
Sure.
I'll leave you on the stage for a few minutes.
Okay.
Yeah?
We're going to start with, I promise it's short, a really short video, because I think sometimes the young people we work with can tell the story better than I can. Listo. Lista para el video, gracias.
Mi nombre es Jimena, tengo 22 años, soy mamá de un niño de 3 años a quien amo muchísimo. Soy una mujer emprendedora, tengo mi comedor propio. En el programa tuve la oportunidad de participar en el Shark Tank. Al final nos dieron el resultado donde me habían dicho que había ganado el capital semilla. Eso no me lo esperaba y no pensé que iba a llegar tan lejos. Ahora tengo a 4 personas trabajando conmigo, pues, y la verdad sí me siento orgullosa en eso, porque estoy ayudando a que ellas estén trabajando y que ellas no piensen en migrar a otro país, poder ayudarlas y tanto a mí también, porque sin ellas yo no puedo sacar mi negocio adelante. Y ahora, como haber ganado el capital semilla, me va a ayudar a crecer mi negocio. Con el transcurso del tiempo podría poner otro negocio o alquilar otro local y poner otro comedor. No quiero quedarme solo con el emprendimiento de un comedor, sino que quiero ser alguien más en la vida. Quiero salir adelante, llegar más lejos, en seguir estudiando y pues la verdad ya no pienso migrar a otro país porque ya sé que en el país donde yo estoy, que es Guatemala, sí podemos salir adelante viendo formas, por ejemplo, emprender o ya sea trabajar.
Gracias. So that was Jimena, and now I'm wondering if you could see, probably you couldn't see the people here, right? You couldn't see the subtitles, so I'll give you the super quick Cliff Notes. Basically, Jimena, she was enrolled in a program for Youth Leadership Initiative, where she, kind of like a AmeriCorps youth service program, where we gave stipends for 6 months for her to do community service, and she opened a bank account for the first time ever. It was actually her first time having an ID. And what she did with the stipends, despite a lot of assumptions predominantly from larger banks, that she would use the stipend frivolously, right? They're gonna, young people, they're gonna spend the money on something, whatever, I don't know, new sneakers, or she saved the money and then she got seed capital as part of the program. And after doing her community service and an internship, she started this business. She has a baby. She looks like she's like 15, but she was 19 when she started. And she started this business in her community and hired 4 other women. She's a Mayan woman from Guatemala. So she employed 4 more people, and now she wants to start another restaurant. So super quick, you just got the visuals, but she's a pretty remarkable young woman, and I think I like starting with that because it shows that, this young woman who didn't finish high school, had a child very young, how do we invest in people like Jimena, and how do we invest in them in different ways, not only financially, but also creating spaces and opportunities. And like I said, she can say it better than I can. We're an organization that was started in El Salvador. We grew, and now we're working in 12 countries in Latin America, and we work in New York City with immigrant youth. So, we've grown. We also have a team of 500 people and lots of volunteers. And we run much like a business. I think a lot of people think that nonprofits are, we run differently. We don't. We kind of run like a business, even though we're not for profit. So we also look for scale. We look to work with, some people call them beneficiaries. We actually call the community members clients because we think of it more as a client and a stakeholder, the general population that we work with. And, like I said when we were speaking with Tom initially, we really think that everybody has potential and we just need to come together and partner to create the opportunities, right? These are some of the countries we work in. Sorry, the actual outline of the map for some reason is invisible, but you can imagine where this is. And we work here in the DR too, actually. I want to emphasize, I was just listening to the tail end of the presentation before, and, like you, we want to look at data, we want to understand what we're doing, and so one of the things that's really important for us is to find out what people's priorities are. Not so much their needs, but what their priorities are, what they want to do, what their aspirations are. So when we talk to young people, we look to connect, not just get information, but to connect and to understand where the opportunities are and what the likelihood of success is of what we're trying to do, which is, from what I read before coming here, a lot of what you do in the different financial institutions you work in. And it's really interesting because the information we collect when we find a way to do it that enables us to connect with the person becomes much more helpful in achieving success. I don't know how many people here from Latin America and Caribe? Okay. So I'll be brief because a good percentage are. We have really high rates of violence and crime. 8% of the world's population, 30% of the world's homicides. That's crazy, right? That's a World Bank statistic, I think from 2023. So that really has an impact, as you well know, and many of you who work in other countries where there are very high rates of violence and crime, it places a lot of barriers and a lot of challenges on what we're trying to do, whether we're trying to do it as a business or as a non-for-profit. And one of the other things that I find, I met a few people at lunch, right now, there are 57 million young people, this is our workforce, living in a context of violence. So that has a huge impact, right? It has a huge impact on how we function, on what we do. Oh, there. And so for children, this is, although children are really resilient, more resilient than we are as adults, but it does create conditions that make it a lot tougher for children. If you're focusing on survival, if your brain is literally trying to keep you alive, it's harder for you to imagine. So once children become old enough where they start taking on responsibilities, like taking care of their younger siblings, doing stuff in the home, having to work in the market, and again, many of you see this in your context, then they stop kind of imagining what they could be professionally. So our workforce is already limiting the aspirations that they can have, right? And that is sad, but it also creates opportunities for us to change that. And create different spaces for them to navigate this. That violence is one of many drivers of migration that we've seen globally, and now, more and more we're just talking about it. It's front and center. There are all kinds of political stances and views around it. And violence is one of the drivers, and so is poverty and lack of opportunity. And, I didn't realize until relatively recently that from 25% of people who are on the move are from Latin America, which is 1 in 4, given all of the conflict around the world. I used to work in humanitarian aid before we started Glasswing 20-something years ago. So I remember working in different countries and hearing about and seeing, I worked in Sudan and Afghanistan and Iraq, and seeing so many people having to move, be forced to move, and the conditions that they had to face. I want to tell 2 stories because we work with immigrant youth in New York City, and Jessica's one example of a young woman who emigrated from rural Guatemala. She didn't speak any Spanish or English, but she spoke 3 languages, right? So all these assets that people have. And she came to the US, and everybody's saying, stay in school, stay in school. And she has to work. She was like, I want to stay in school, but I have to work every night because I have to pay back the coyotes, the people that brought me here. And I also have to send money to keep my other siblings in school. So these kinds of challenges are what kids face. And yet, she has stayed in school even though she stays up really late, and she's trying to really make a living and become a steady source of income for her family at home. Another student of ours, Kevin, and this speaks a little bit more to, he was one of our best students. He was in debate club. He was in all kinds of educational programs. And he had to leave because he was assaulted, and he had to leave really quickly. He had to leave El Salvador. And he emigrated, so we lost these 2 resources that were really incredible young people, and he ended up coming back. But because he also had to pay the person who brought him, he ended up not finishing school. So you have these young people that if we created conditions for them to be able to stay in their countries, these 2 people could really drive development. They could become part of our workforce, and they could really transform the communities that they live in. The public systems, a lot of times people, will say this is the responsibility of the public system, public schools. The reality is they're not equipped to deal with a lot of these things, right? The schools, the quality and access, depending on where you live, is not optimal, not ideal. Mental health in Honduras, we have 2 mental health professionals, including social workers, not for every 100,000 people. And we were just talking about all the violence. So if you think about, if we don't feel well, everybody in this room, if we're not well, if we're stressed, the neuroscience tells us that you cannot access learning, you cannot be as productive as you would be otherwise. So mental health is something that's really important, and governments are not well positioned to do this. And economic opportunity, right, that we'll talk about in a little bit more. I wanted to share some statistics. I'll move so you can see them. Just about Latin America, right? The underpaid employment, the income generation here amongst young people is very low. And so is this challenge. They used to call this group of young people that weren't working, weren't in school, and weren't getting training as ninis. Now the term is NEET, but this is a huge proportion of the population that we're missing out on kind of unlocking all the resources that they could generate and produce. So these are some of the things that we can address, right, in different ways, and I'll go into that in a minute. And I think one thing that I wanted to underscore, that two of these, when you think about temporary employment, and almost 1 out of 3 young people and there's a job that lasts for less than a year, that combined with the fact that so many young people feel like they're going to lose their job, the uncertainty has big impacts on what they see as their potential future, whether they invest or not in their future. That has impacts in the financial sector, of course. So these kinds of hurdles are things that we can work on, but we can only do them if we partner in a real way, right? We talk about partnership a lot, but it's hard to operationalize or to get these partnerships going in a concrete way. Women, and these are 2 graphs that I thought was interesting just to show the population of youth that aren't working, aren't employed, and aren't in training. And then the one on the right is, the informality, the fact that, young people, their businesses like Jimena, who you just saw, her business isn't part of the formal economy. It also influences and impacts, and you know better than I, the economies of our countries. This young woman that's her baby. She is younger than the other woman, but she is, she's also working to access training opportunities and finish school. One of the biggest, opportunities for growth is the inclusion of women in the economy. If we include women in the economy in Latin America, that can increase by 20% the GDP of our countries. And that varies globally, but it is a huge opportunity to think about, how we can engage women more, how we can bancarizar, right? How we can get more women to open bank accounts, to engage with financial systems. And that requires taking, and a lot of this you already do, that's why you're here, taking our services and offering our services in, meeting people where they're at. Physically, how do you actually integrate women more into economies? We have to meet people where they're at, and that's physically and also culturally and linguistically. So this is a huge opportunity because that will, and women, and I'm sure again, you know all this, right? Women are better at paying back loans. Women, once you engage them in your businesses, they're just better at complying with all these things. So really, if we think about the negative impacts of the context that we're facing, that means that we have this huge potential, human potential that's unrealized, and there's so many things that work. Sometimes it feels overwhelming. All these things feel overwhelming, but there are so many things that work, that are evidence-based like you. We're rigorous, and we want to be efficient with our resources. So I want to go into a few of them, and then we're going to have a conversation with Tom, but I wanted to talk about a few. Globally, with the pandemic, there's a huge learning crisis. And math and reading are 2 areas that are foundational for the rest of schooling and actually lead to kids dropping out. And yet, I don't know, is there anyone here from India? Yes, and we just met. So interestingly, here in Latin America, and I mention this because these are things there's an organization called Pratham, and Pratham is a huge education organization, and this is incredible because we saw what they do, and this is something that I'm sure you do amongst yourselves too, what are your peers doing? How can we adapt it to our context? We started doing feasibility studies to see if this would help in our context, and now we're working with public school systems. So it's almost like R&D. When you partner with nonprofits, you can partner with them to do almost R&D, research and development, to identify things that work, generate the evidence, and influence the organizations, because it really influence policy. And we found that you see these statistics, right? Up to 75 kids can't do basic math or recognize numbers, and then between 50 and 80 can't read. And now after 50 hours, that's it, 50 hours with the teachers that are already in the schools, no new staff or anything, you flip those numbers. So now 80 to 85% of kids can read and 75% of kids can do basic math. So these are things that are done in communities where you work. These are things that can change, right, by equipping teachers. And it sounds as you don't necessarily have to do it yourselves. It's working with organizations that can do this. And there are so many organizations that do amazing work in every country that you work in. Which, by the way, if I can ever be helpful, I have a ton of colleagues from all over the world, and I'd be happy to put you in touch. And with researchers, right, and the mental health. How many of you have worked or felt stress, or how many of you have seen amongst your workforce that they're facing a lot of anxiety? This affects our productivity. By investing in the well-being of our own teams, this can also impact our work, and it can impact the communities, because if you feel better, the way you engage with your community stakeholders is going to be better. And that's something that we've been working with also with systems, like public systems, education, law enforcement, health, but also with communities. And then you saw at the beginning the video, and she was talking about her new business. And this kind of thing, I think, is one of the most exciting entry points, and it's about volunteering. It's about volunteering, not just you, but your teams. Being the person that you needed when you were younger, for one person, one young person, can make a huge difference. In conflict settings or in violence settings or in stressful settings, having a caring adult in your life is the best way to address the impact of trauma. One person that's consistently, talk to them once a week. If you can get together with them, better. So being that person in a person's life, because otherwise it seems like it's too much, that makes a huge difference. And we've seen this, we've researched it. So being someone's mentor, providing internships. We all remember looking for a job, and the first question is like, what experience do you have? You're like, I don't know, I'm 17, I'm 18, I have no experience, no one's given me a job. So it's like you're expected to have experience, but no one will hire you, especially if you're from a tough neighborhood, if you're from a place with a bad reputation. So giving young people the opportunity to do internships is really big, and they're usually willing to do all kinds of things. So I wanted to mention those because they're ways to start and not feel like everything has to be big immediately, and partnering helps you do this with different organizations. And then the bancarización, right? If people can open a bank account, and even with young people, when we partnered with banks, we had, in one of our projects in Honduras and Guatemala, we opened 13,000 new bank accounts. People who never would have opened a bank account, because they started to understand the system. And when you partner with organizations that are rooted in their community, they have the convening power to be able to establish that kind of trust. Because in our societies, especially where there is conflict and poverty and risk, where the trust is eroded, it's really hard to get people to trust institutions, whether they're public institutions or private. So community partners can help get us closer, acercarnos, help get us closer to the communities and potential future clients, right? So I would say that this engaging, this opportunity that we have right now to really pull together and to partner with organizations that can help us get closer to communities and understand their priorities is I think it's more needed than ever, right? Because already we are reducing poverty rates globally. We are reducing, we're increasing rates of vaccination. We're reducing disease. So this is when. And we've seen over and over that young people do want to be part of the change. These two women developed a community project in the Mayan Highlands in Guatemala. They pitched it to an all-male committee. They got seed capital, and they funded a project in their community, and now their role in the community is completely different. They're becoming leaders, and they're active in their community as leaders. And then we have Nancy, who I mentioned earlier, that started a business, which is now legally registered, right? So she's going to be paying taxes, she's going to be taking out loans, and she's already growing and starting a second. She started a supermarket, the first supermarket in her community to be a legal retail spot, and now she's starting a second one, and they hire people. And there's so many stories like this. This is just a couple. But it's giving them a chance and engaging with young people, with our workforce, our current and future workforce. And then I'll finish on this so we can have a chat with Tom. And I will say that at the end of the day, and I know you're talking about this is a group that's already, convinced, right, that it's necessary to focus on ESG. It's necessary to focus on inclusion and sustainability. But and I'm just here to say that we in our sector are eager to partner in doing that. And it doesn't mean, going to every bank and asking for money. It's really partnering. It's like, how do we operate together and side by side to get things done and to amplify access, increase social inclusion and economic inclusion. Because if we do have the conditions that we need, the soil, we can help people navigate this adversity, and we can unlock that potential, because there's just as much potential, right, in a community, a rural community that's remote, as there is in a community that may have a lot more resources or where there's more access to education. So as much as we can do this together, we really can transform our constituents, our clients, our communities, and our countries. And I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to hear you, learn about what you're doing the rest of the time I'm here. And I also want to thank you, because hopefully other banks and big banks can learn from the work you're doing and feel pressure to do things differently. I can tell you that we work with a lot of large banks in the region, and your leadership by example, I'm excited about it. I'm excited to be here, and that's it. Thank you so much. We're going to chat with Tom, so thank you.
So we sit down here? Sure.
Yes.
Good. Thank you so much, Celina. And I think that gives us a real picture of what you do. I want to dive into it. Maybe first in the mechanics of it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So we all use words like theory of change,
yes,
and researchable or evidence-based things. What do you do to learn from your learning?
So, like you, we do a lot of data analytics. We're doing both quantitative data, so we do a lot of surveys. So we work in public schools, and we do extracurricular complementary education programming in public schools, mainly schools located in high-risk environments. And we learn over the years, we collect a lot of data, and then we also do the qualitative. We get close, we learn, we connect with people, and we learn from them. So that for us is, part of that rigor and commitment to learning. We've also, actually this is interesting, we've hired 20% of our staff. We have 500 people on the team. 20% of our staff are actually former students. So having your clients, so to speak, be part of your team is a great way to it's market research, right? It's a great way to get information. So we do that. We work on mental health in different sectors, and again, with that rigor and with other actors and employability and everything.
Thank you. It's helpful to understand that, and it's because it's a kind of a trick question for me. So we just heard from Mercedes Bidart, and she talked a lot about data and data collection. Yeah. And maybe you know where I'm going with this. You're talking about building relationships and collecting data, and we're all talking about collecting data. In a certain way, data kind of takes us back to the old world of extractive industry, that we're once again extracting from communities.
Yeah.
And what I want to know is, what's the cycle through which we can maybe be extractive, or we can get that data, but at the same time, alongside data, we're building relationships?
Yeah, I definitely think what's interesting about data is you can get the analytics, you can look at them, but They're not nuanced, so you don't really understand. If you're looking at why people make decisions and you're only looking at data, you can't really understand the nuance. Whereas, and it is just asking, and people never get back the data of what they participated in. Whereas, so, a lot of the things we try to do is, okay, here's the data from the surveys. What do you think? Does that actually represent, what you think? And we've found that we learn a lot more when we have a real connection and a conversation than just when we get data about why something didn't work, why there wasn't as much uptake in some sort of service or program we were offering.
Yep. So that takes me to partnerships. We all talk about partnerships. Quite often we're bad at partnering. How do we get better at partnering?
Partnering is hard, and it can be a real pain in the neck, right? It really is, because everybody's pulling in their own direction. Everybody wants, this is what I want, this is what I want. So I think just the alignment is hard. And I find, at least when we're trying to partner, and we partner with government in every country, and then they change every 4 or 5 years, and then you're like, whoa, backpedal, who are the people? And one thing we found with government, for example, is how do we, you kind of land, the alignment is about the why. So it's like, how do you align with your stakeholders on the why? Why are we doing this? And that's where we can align, because then the politics and all that is kind of put aside when you're focused on, and typically we want the same end goal. So I think it's a pain, but I think, at least in our case, the most successful partnerships we've ever had with private sector and government are when it's unlikely partnerships. Sometimes your biggest detractors end up becoming your biggest allies, and I think partnerships are about compromise and transparency and getting out of our own way and really centering on the why and asking, because if not, everybody comes to the table, they're like, this is what we're doing, this is what we recommend, but we don't say, what do you think, or what are your goals? And sometimes if you start with a question, you'll get the alignment more easily, right? And then with the public sector, it's like, make relationships with the middle management, because the minister is going to change, right? In our countries, the government appointees are going to change, but if people get to know you on all different levels, the municipal government, the same thing. Like, how do you get to know people at different levels so you really have a partnership that can be sustained over time?
Yep, very important, super important. And I think that commitment curve kind of goes with, and the why is with the values. And how do we have shared values? How do we have aligned mission?
And if you're talking to the communities that your clients, so is everybody else. Like, everybody wants to be in good standing with the end user of your service, your product. So if the more information we really know by connecting with the people and our constituents or our clients, the better we'll be positioned to negotiate with partners in a constructive way, right?
Yep. So I'm going to ask you a question that maybe isn't close to your nature, because I sense your nature as a builder and a connector and a community builder, but I want you to be tough for a minute. What is your challenge to our financial institutions? What's the big challenge that you put to us?
I put to you, and how can you get, really, one is ask people what their priorities are. Ask more questions, not through data, but really connecting with the person and understanding, because I think that there are potentially, tons of people who want to be part of the financial system, and I think that sometimes takes more resources. It takes meeting people where they are at and actually getting there. And one of the biggest challenges we've had when we've worked on economic inclusion is just getting people to open bank accounts. They're not going to go to the institution. They're not going to go to the physical structure, especially women and young women. So how do we make it easier for people so they feel more comfortable? And that might mean really doing that community outreach. So I think that's one of the main things that we've seen. And at the end, it's people talking to people, not so much an institution talking to community. And I do think, at least with these 13,000 young people, there was a lot more bank accounts, right? That's a lot. And that took working in partnership with someone who people trust immediately, if they don't already trust you, which in many cases they probably do, but it also just took legwork and asking how people would feel more comfortable and what would make them trust the financial institutions that we were encouraging them to become affiliated with.
Yep. Organizations like yours also have been through a terrible time in the last period because of the funding scene and the financing scene.
Yeah.
And what are you learning about being in that washing machine, that being turned upside down and things evaporating, and what can we learn about how organizations like yours are pivoting, and in what ways is there a need for partnership there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we had about 40% of our funding was from international development, and so we had to pivot quickly and change our team. And I think, and one of the ways, for example, we're looking at outcomes-based financing, we're looking at innovative financing. So those are ways in which, we're looking to partner, and lots of organizations like ours. This is something, we all go to conferences in our sectors, and I do, like you, go to a lot, and I think there's a really interesting opportunity now for the financial sector to find ways and business opportunities with the nonprofit sector, but that our values aligned. And, I know that a lot of our peers globally are looking at innovative financing mechanisms in communities and regionally, internationally. And sometimes, and one thing that I will say is that sometimes, and I'll speak firsthand, we go sometimes to the bank we know or we see that's more present in the countries we're working in. And that isn't, a lot of times it's not the best decision because there isn't that much alignment. So I feel like there's a really interesting opportunity for financial institutions like the ones in this room that you're all representing to look at this as a potential other market, because we had to, with this financial inclusion, the project that included the financial inclusion with young people, we had to change from the original banks that we were working with just because it didn't work. And we ended up with smaller financial institutions. And some of them weren't very small, but they were smaller and more available to communities, and culturally, people felt more comfortable there. No.
Last question. What is your highest hope for the GABV?
My highest hope is that you can walk out of here and think about one way that you can be involved in a person's life. And like I said before, be the person you needed when you were a teenager. Like one way you can be involved with one young person in your, whatever your ecosystem is, consistently. And then on a more macro level, if you can go back, if you're not already doing this, and if you are, explore even more, who can you identify in your, again, your ecosystem that you can partner with to really create conditions, like social and economic conditions, and the soil, so we can stop so we can really be involved in unlocking more potential amongst young people, because it is our workforce and its future families. So how can we at the individual and institutional level get really serious about creating conditions and opportunities for young people between 15 and 22. I think
that's a great hope. Thank you, Celina de Sola, for inspiring us, for helping us to see how you're cultivating the social soil, to see how we need to partner, how we need to make connections to your work, and we hope also that you find your way to some of our banks, especially in Latin America, and find great partnerships there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you so much.
Thank you.